The late summer air hung heavy over the vast Hartwell estate, the golden fields swaying lazily in the warm wind. Richard Hartwell, a man in his late 50s, stood on the balcony of his study, sipping scotch and scanning the driveway. His dark suit was immaculate, but there was a tension in his jawline, an unspoken unease he couldn't quite place. It had been almost 4 years since his son, Alex, had last set foot here. Richard had always imagined this return would be joyful, father and son reunited, putting past disagreements behind them. Yet now, as the black sedan rolled up the gravel path, Richard felt a flicker of uncertainty. Alex stepped out, taller and leaner than Richard remembered, his once unruly hair now neatly cut. He was 24, confident in his movements, his sharp blue eyes scanning the house with a hint of detachment. Beside him, Richard's young wife, Elizabeth, appeared in the doorway. She was striking, in her early 30s, with golden hair and an elegance that seemed effortless. The moment her gaze landed on Alex, something subtle shifted. A fraction of a second, a faint spark, not one Richard noticed, but one that neither Alex nor Elizabeth missed. "Alex," Richard greeted warmly, embracing his son. "Welcome home." "Good to be back," Alex replied, his voice calm, almost too measured. Inside, dinner was served in the grand dining room, where the long oak table seemed to swallow their voices. Conversation flowed politely. Richard spoke about business expansions, Alex about his travels. But Elizabeth listened more than she spoke, her eyes occasionally lingering on Alex's hands, the way he lifted his glass, the quiet confidence in his tone. Later that evening, as Richard took a phone call in his office, Alex stepped into the garden for some air. He found Elizabeth there, barefoot on the grass, her silk dress catching the moonlight. "You've grown," she said softly, her voice carrying a note of something he couldn't quite name. "So have you," Alex replied, watching her. "But different." Elizabeth smiled faintly. "Different can be good." It was harmless talk, or at least it should have been. But the air between them was charged, the silence after her words heavier than the humid night. From that moment on, there was a subtle undercurrent in every interaction, glances that lingered a second too long, smiles that weren't quite innocent. Richard remained oblivious, busy with work and business dinners. Elizabeth, however, seemed suddenly more present whenever Alex was in the room. One evening, while Richard was away in the city for a late meeting, Elizabeth brought a bottle of wine to the terrace where Alex sat reading. "To new beginnings," she said, pouring them both a glass. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away. The rules of the household, of morality itself, began to blur. What started as a spark was quietly fanning into something far more dangerous. The days that followed felt like a silent game, one played in shadows and stolen glances. Richard's schedule kept him away more often than not, and the house seemed to shrink when it was just Alex and Elizabeth inside. It began innocently, or so Alex told himself. A conversation in the kitchen that lasted too long. A hand on his shoulder that lingered just a breath longer than needed. But the look in her eyes was never innocent. One rainy afternoon, they found themselves together in the music room. Elizabeth sat at the piano, her fingers brushing the keys, the soft melody filling the air. Alex leaned against the doorway, watching her. "You play beautifully," he said. She glanced up, smiling faintly. "I like when someone listens." He stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. The music slowed, then stopped. Silence, except for the rain tapping against the tall windows. "You're dangerous," Alex murmured. Elizabeth's lips curved into something between amusement and challenge. "And you're curious." He shouldn't have kissed her, but the moment her hand touched his face, the choice was gone. The kiss was slow at first, almost hesitant, but quickly deepened. Her perfume, the warmth of her skin, the way she melted into him. It felt like crossing a line he'd never return from. After that, there was no turning back. When Richard was home, they played the perfect family roles. But in stolen hours, behind locked doors, in the shadows of the garden, in the guest house far from the main estate, they belonged to each other. Elizabeth was reckless in a way that frightened Alex. She would call him to her room at night, the risk of being caught only feeding her hunger. Sometimes she whispered things about Richard, things meant to drive a wedge deeper between father and son. Weeks passed, and their meetings grew more desperate. Then one morning, Elizabeth appeared pale, her hands trembling as she poured coffee. Something's wrong, she whispered when Richard left for the day. Alex followed her to the upstairs bathroom. She held up a small white stick, 2 pink lines clear against the plastic. I'm pregnant, she said, her voice a mixture of fear and something that looked dangerously like satisfaction. His mind spun. It could be his, he said quickly, but even as the words left his mouth, they both knew the truth. It's yours, she replied softly, stepping closer. The room felt suddenly too small, the air too heavy. Alex's stomach turned. This wasn't just an affair anymore. This was a fuse lit, burning fast toward an inevitable explosion. Neither of them noticed the shadow passing by the half-closed door, pausing for just a heartbeat before moving on. Richard Hartwell was a man of routine. Breakfast at 7, coffee black, the Financial Times spread before him. Elizabeth knew his patterns, and so did Alex. That's why the subtle changes were so alarming. Richard had started coming home earlier. He lingered in rooms he normally passed through without a glance. He'd ask Alex about his day with a tone that wasn't casual, but searching. And sometimes his eyes would drift to Elizabeth in a way that made her skin prickle, not with guilt, but with the sense of being measured. One late afternoon, as Alex was leaving the gym in town, he found a folded note tucked under the windshield wiper of his car. No signature, just 3 words written in neat, almost delicate handwriting. He's watching you. He scanned the parking lot, but saw no one he recognized. His chest tightened. That night, Elizabeth paced their secret meeting place, the guest house, like a trapped animal. He knows something, she said. I can feel it. He's quieter, but heavier. You're imagining it, Alex tried to assure her, though the note burned in his pocket. But the cracks were showing. Richard's questions became sharper. He'd remark on Elizabeth's tiredness at the breakfast table or casually bring up Alex's late nights. Then came the evening when Richard invited Alex to his study for a drink. The fire crackled. A chessboard sat between them, pieces arranged mid-game. You've grown into a man, Richard said, pouring them both whiskey. But manhood comes with temptations and consequences. Alex froze, glass halfway to his lips. What do you mean? Richard's gaze didn't waver. Only that I hope you remember who you are and where your loyalties lie. It could have been innocent fatherly advice, or it could have been a warning. Elizabeth, meanwhile, grew bolder in her recklessness, perhaps as a way to fight the creeping fear. But then, late one night, she crept into Alex's room, her robe barely tied, and whispered something that chilled him more than any of Richard's stares. If he finds out, I'll make sure he doesn't live to tell it. The words were sharp, almost casual, but her eyes were deadly serious. Alex lay awake long after she left, the echo of her voice merging with the memory of that note. Somewhere in this sprawling estate, there was more danger than he had imagined. And it wasn't just Richard. The first sign came in the form of a photograph. It was slipped under Alex's bedroom door in the early hours of the morning. A glossy print showing him and Elizabeth in the guest house, her hands on his face, his lips dangerously close to hers. No note this time. No threats. Just proof. Alex stared at it for a long time, heart pounding. There was no date stamp, but he could tell it was recent. The red sweater he wore was still hanging over his chair. Whoever took this had been close. When he showed it to Elizabeth, she didn't panic. She smiled. This changes nothing, she said, brushing it aside like it was a scrap of junk mail. If anything, it means they're afraid of us. They? Alex pressed. She didn't answer. Meanwhile, Richard's presence was suffocating. He seemed to be everywhere at once. In the garden where Elizabeth liked to walk, in the garage when Alex came back from town, in the library when Alex thought he'd be alone. His tone was polite, his expression calm, but his eyes, they were colder now. One evening, Richard announced they'd have a family dinner, just the 3 of them. Elizabeth dressed in deep green silk, her perfume heavy in the air. Alex barely touched his food, too busy watching Richard, who was in no hurry to speak. Halfway through dessert, Richard set down his fork. I had a visitor today, he said, looking between them. An old friend. He showed me something. Elizabeth's hand didn't even tremble as she lifted her wine glass. And Richard smiled faintly. And I think you should both be very careful in the days ahead. Accidents happen. That night, Alex couldn't sleep. Near midnight, he heard faint footsteps outside his window. He peeked through the curtain, A shadow moved across the lawn toward the old shed at the edge of the property. Curiosity overpowered caution. He slipped on a jacket and followed. The shed door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing the faint glow of a laptop screen. A man sat inside, hunched over the keyboard, headphones in. On the screen, live feeds from small cameras placed around the estate. One was in the guest house, another in Elizabeth's bedroom. The man turned suddenly, his face unfamiliar. "You shouldn't be here," he said flatly. Alex stepped back, heart racing. "Who are you?" The man's expression was unreadable. "The one keeping you alive." Before Alex could speak, the man pulled the laptop shut, brushed past him, and disappeared into the night. When Alex returned to his room, there was a new envelope waiting on his desk. Inside was a single sentence, typed in bold. "Choose her or your life." By morning, the envelope's warning felt less like a threat and more like a prophecy. Alex kept it hidden, but its words echoed in his mind with every glance from Richard and every touch from Elizabeth. Elizabeth, however, was in a different mood entirely. She'd grown impatient, reckless. "It's time," she whispered one evening in the guest house, her hand tightening on his. "Richard's health isn't what it used to be. A little push, and everything we want is ours." Alex stared at her, horrified. "You're talking about murder." She didn't even flinch. "I'm talking about freedom." That night, Richard invited Alex for a late drive to discuss business. They took the winding cliff road, the ocean roaring far below. Richard's voice was calm, but his grip on the wheel was tight. "I know you think I'm blind," he said, eyes fixed ahead. "But I see everything, Alex. Everything." The car slowed near a sharp curve. Richard turned his head, his expression unreadable. "Tell me, is she worth dying for?" Before Alex could respond, Richard pressed the accelerator, the car lurching toward the edge. Alex grabbed the wheel, yanking them back onto the road. The car skidded to a stop inches from the cliff. Richard exhaled slowly, a faint smirk on his lips. "Good reflexes. You might need them soon." Back at the estate, Elizabeth was waiting. When Alex told her what happened, her face hardened. "He's testing you," she said. "And if you fail the next test, it will be your body they pull from the rocks." The following night, a storm rolled in. The rain hammered the roof as Alex lay awake, listening to the wind howl. Sometime past midnight, he heard footsteps in the hall, slow, deliberate. His door creaked open. A figure stood in the darkness. Lightning flashed, revealing Elizabeth's face and the gleam of a small glass vial in her hand. "It'll be quick," she whispered. "In his tea. No blood, no struggle." Alex shook his head. "You're insane." "Insane?" She leaned closer, her voice sharp. "We're the only one who sees the truth. If Richard lives, we both die." She pressed the vial into his palm. "Tomorrow morning. Do it, or I will." The storm outside roared louder, but inside Alex felt a different kind of pressure, one that made it hard to breathe. Somewhere deep down, he knew that the real danger wasn't the man sleeping in the master bedroom. It was the woman standing in front of him. Morning came gray and heavy, the storm's aftermath leaving the estate soaked and eerily silent. Alex hadn't slept at all. The vial Elizabeth had given him lay on his nightstand like a live grenade. At breakfast, Richard sat at the head of the table, reading the paper, a faint smile on his lips. Elizabeth moved gracefully between the kitchen and dining room, her green silk robe brushing the floor. The teapot steamed on the counter. Alex's hands trembled as he poured a cup. He uncorked the vial under the table, the faint bitter scent hitting his nose. "Just a drop," she'd said. "Enough to stop a heart in minutes." But as he reached for Richard's cup, something shifted in the air. Richard looked up from his paper, his gaze pinning Alex in place. "Milk, no sugar. Just the way you like it," Richard said softly, but his eyes told another story. "I know." Alex froze. His hand hovered above the tea. Elizabeth, watching from the doorway, gave the smallest nod, urging him on. He set the vial down beside the cup. "Here," he said, forcing his voice steady. Richard took the tea, but instead of drinking, he placed it gently back on the saucer. "You've been having trouble sleeping, haven't you?" he asked, folding the paper. "It shows in your eyes." Elizabeth's jaw tightened. "Richard, it's just tea." He ignored her. "You know, Alex, in business, hesitation can be fatal." The tension shattered with a sudden clang from the kitchen. Alex turned toward the sound, And when he looked back, Richard was holding the vial between two fingers, examining it under the light. Bitter almond, Richard murmured. Classic. Elizabeth's face drained of color. Where did you? I could ask you the same, he interrupted, slipping the vial into his pocket. But I think I already know. For a long, awful moment, no one moved. Then Richard rose, towering over them both. From this moment on, he said slowly, you are my guests here. And guests do not overstay their welcome. Elizabeth tried to speak, but Richard's glare silenced her. You have until tomorrow night to decide which of you leaves first. When he was gone, Elizabeth's mask slipped. Her voice was sharp, urgent. He's playing with us. If we wait, he'll kill us both. Alex stared at her, the realization finally sinking in. They were no longer conspirators. They were prey, and the hunter was giving them a head start. The night air was thick, the sound of waves crashing against the cliff echoing through the darkness. Alex stood at his window, staring at the estate's gates. Freedom was only 100 yards away, but it felt unreachable. Elizabeth slipped into his room, her face pale but determined. We leave tonight, she whispered. He's asleep. I've got the car keys. Alex hesitated. And if he's not asleep? She didn't answer, just took his hand and pulled him toward the hallway. The mansion seemed to breathe around them, each creak of the floorboards sounding like a shout. They made it to the garage, the keys clinking in Elizabeth's trembling hands. But as she slid them into the ignition, the headlights burst on, blinding them. Richard stood in front of the car, drenched in rain, holding a shotgun. Going somewhere, he asked. Elizabeth tried to speak, but he raised a hand. Save it. I've known about the two of you for months. I let it play out because I wanted to see how far you'd go, and you didn't disappoint. Alex felt the cold barrel press against his chest as Richard stepped closer. You know what the worst betrayal is? Richard's voice was almost gentle. Not the act itself. It's the belief that I wouldn't see it coming. Elizabeth's eyes darted to the side door. Run, she mouthed. Alex didn't move. Something in Richard's gaze froze him, a calm, terrifying certainty. Then Richard stepped back, lowering the shotgun. Leave. Both of you. But know this, you don't escape me. Not really. They fled into the night, the rain soaking them to the bone. It wasn't until they reached the highway that Elizabeth's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her face went white. Alex took the phone. It was a video, grainy security footage from the guest house. The date was 2 weeks ago. The clip showed them together, laughing, kissing, and then Elizabeth whispering, "We'll do it soon. He'll never know." Below the video was a single message from Richard. I always know. Alex dropped the phone, his stomach twisting. Beside him, Elizabeth started laughing, a sharp, broken sound. What's so funny? He demanded. She turned to him, eyes glittering in the dark. Don't you get it? He didn't let us go out of mercy. The headlights of a black SUV appeared in the distance, closing in fast. He let us go, she said, voice shaking. Because the game isn't over. And as the SUV's engine roared closer, Alex finally understood. They had never escaped. They were exactly where Richard wanted them.